Hello and welcome to Nerdburger, for nerds by nerds. I'm Nerd Steve, and today I am hanging out with Craig Campbell from Nerdburger Games. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you, Dave?
I'm doing excellent. So it appears you have another Kickstarter, which there will be coming up, which there will be a link in the description, plus some other links you can go clicking around. But real quick, if you could just introduce yourself and kind of tell people a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, I'm Craig Campbell. I'm the owner of Nerdburger Games, and I make tabletop role playing games. And there's like supplements and accessories and all that fun stuff that goes with some of that stuff. Um, yeah, I've done a bunch of freelancing for many years before I started kind of making my own stuff. I still freelance occasionally here and there for some companies. So yeah, side gig. I make a lot of games.
I don't know how you would have time to even do any freelancing at this point.
It's very intermittent. It's just kind of like when something really speaks to me. Last freelance thing I did was, I don't know, maybe a year or a little over ago. Um, the Jenga tower games or
Oh
the
yeah, Dread.
tumbling block games. Well, there was a friend of mine put together a game. Pete Petruccia from Imagining Games did a thing called Rest in Pieces, which uses that system and kind of expands on it. And it's about, like, in the game you are a roommate with the Grim Reaper, and he's a terrible roommate, and you want to get him out of there. um, and yeah, the game's built around that. And there's like expansion decks for cards and everything that are used in the game. And I wrote one of the expansion decks.
Oh, nice. So the Grim Reaper is your roommate, and
Yeah, and he's terrible. He's a slacker a-hole.
He's
Just sits in
vicious.
front of the tube, like it. And you, when you play the game, you basically decide, what it is about the Grim Reaper that makes him terrible. So it plays a little differently every time. Like, he might be like pining over a lost love, or
Yeah.
he's like, he never does any of the chores around the apartment or whatever.
So what are you working on nowadays?
I have a Kickstarter going live on Tuesday, October 5th for a solo fantasy RPG called Secrets of the Vibrant Isle.
And what is Secrets of the Vibrant Isle?
It's a game. Imagine, if you will, that you shipwreck on, or your character, I guess, shipwrecks on a fantastical island. You were seeking this out. You're looking for it. You managed to find your way to this kind of place of legend called the Vibrant Isle, and you decide, okay, well, I'm going to go and explore and learn what are all the secrets of the isle, what's going on here. And in the game, you can scavenge your shipwreck, protect your camp in different ways, explore the island, and eventually also meet the inhabitants of the island. There's a community of people that call the island home, and during the course of the game, you'll go through and do a mix and match of all those different things, with the end goal of proving to the island, and sort of to the inhabitants as well, that you are worthy of being there, because the island is mysterious and mystical and magical, and will kick you out if it decides you don't belong there. And you've got 4 weeks of in-game time to do that.
And this is a solo game, right?
Yep, you play it all by your lonesome. I like to think of it as kind of a cross between a rules light RPG and one of those choose your own adventure type books. So there's your character has traits and stats and things. So you've got some dice rolls to make. So there's a random element, but there's also a great deal of choice that you will make. You'll decide to do these different things, and so it leads you down different paths.
So is it almost like there's a bunch of pre-written kind of adventures that you kind of work your way through, and based on decisions that you make have different outcomes?
Essentially, yeah. If you decide to explore the island, that's like the most robust part of the game. If you
Hmm.
explore the island, you roll percentile dice. If you roll doubles, you encounter one of the inhabitants, and that takes you to a subsection of the game where you go through multiple encounters with the inhabitants. And when you start, you kind of just you glimpse them. You get a chance to kind of see what they look like from afar, and then in subsequent encounters, you get closer, manage to meet them, learn more and more about them, and you sort of world build them as you go. They're not defined in the game. You'll create your version of the inhabitants each time you play. And by the end, then the final encounter with the inhabitants is to be invited to their community, and one of them becomes a friend, and it accompanies you on your adventures in the island.
What are the challenges of creating a solo RPG? Like what was the process you went through?
Well, there was creating like a simple dice system that would provide a little bit of random, give you a chance to succeed and fail at doing things, and the chance to ultimately fail at the goal of staying on the island. Was kind of that was its own thing, and it's the system isn't terribly complex, so it's pretty straightforward. You can like all the rules are on like 2 pages. The biggest challenge probably was writing the explorations for the game. If you don't roll doubles on that percentile dice, you go to one of 90 explorations, which are like 90 short encounters that describe basically there's a quick description of like, this is what you come across. Here's like the twist or what the challenge of that thing is. And then you make like either something happens to you, you gain something, lose something, or you make a trait check to determine what happens. And then you go back and you, again, after that resolves, you make another choice to do whatever, protect your camp or scavenge or whatever you're going to do. Try to improve yourself. That's another thing you can do as your characters progress the character capabilities. And you keep going and as you go, you gain gear and things that you find on the island. You might lose some things. You'll encounter little creatures that can come along and help you, nuisances that follow you around and cause problems. You can gain magical blessings or curses, and find ways to deal with anything that's detrimental, or you just have to kind of suffer with whatever the downside to that is, and you work your way toward trying to stay on the island. Lots of encounters. That was the biggest thing. It was like writing 90 encounters, so much so that I brought a co-designer in, because I figured 2 imaginations are better than 1 for that. So,
and collaboration works
yeah,
wonders for that as well.
Yeah, and I worked with a friend, Shireen Gilchrist, who has written a little bit for some of the Caper supplements previously, and she wrote more of the encounters than I did, because I kind of developed the rule system too. So she was like heavy into the encounters. So she wrote a lot of stuff that like I will, like my imagination would never have come up with that. Like there's just ideas that she came up with.
What was the impetus for this game? Like, where did you start? Did you start with the concept? Did you start with, I want to make a solo RPG?
Well, it kind of started with a few things. The first thing that happened was the art that's in the game. I came across the artist. Her name is Gemma. She is at Ashen Wave on Twitter. She does this really beautiful, fantastical artwork that's like a lot of bright, brilliant colors, deeply saturated colors, all out of her own imagination, just like all sorts of weird, interesting, fantastical things. So I started following her on Twitter. And at one point I reached out and asked her, like, if I ever think of a game that kind of fits your artwork, would you be interested in licensing some art to be in the game book? And she said yes. And then a year passed. And my friend Derek Kamal ran a Kickstarter earlier in this year for a solo RPG called The Broken Cask, where you play a tavern owner in a fantasy realm. And you manage the tavern and deal with the patrons and send adventurers off on quests and everything. It's kind of like, just like a cozy little game of passing the time, have a hot drink and a snack and, run your tavern. And so I got intrigued by the idea of the solo game, which, I had heard of them, and I've bought a few and played a few, but I figured, okay, well, I've been bandying about this idea of doing something sort of based on Lost, the TV show.
Yeah.
I just hadn't found the right thing for it. I've tried a couple of different ideas of like where I could, like, people show up on an island and they can't leave, and there's all sorts of mysteries and things. And then I just kind of combined all of those things, the solo game idea, the artwork, and being on the island, and meshed it into this game.
What is that? What is the core mechanic you're using in this one?
It's very straightforward. Since you're rolling percentile dice for the encounters, I kept it all in D10s. So you've got 4 traits, which are discover, interact, learn, and survive. The 4 things that you're going to be kind of that covers everything you'll do on the island. And for each one, you have a score between 1 and 4. You roll a D10, add that score plus any other bonuses that you might get from other things versus target numbers. And so it's kind of a pass fail for simplicity's sake. But your traits can go up. You can gain and lose equipment and creatures and things that help you to gain those bonuses. So you might start have a very small bonus to start with and have a much higher bonus later on. And then you've also got 3 basically point tracks that you keep track of. One is willpower, which gives you an extra D10, so you can roll 2 and take the better of the 2. But then you also have different encounters will gain you worry or wonder. And you can spend those points to adjust your encounter rolls up or down by 10. So you spend 1 point of worry to reduce that percentile die roll down by 10, and you go to the lower numbers, which is where the darker things are, to face your fears and reduce your worry. And then you spend wonder to increase by 10 and go up toward the higher numbers, which has more of the kind of like light and fluffy and wonderful things that are on the island.
Oh, nice. So one way or the other, if you go heavy in one direction, you're eventually going to have to go the other way.
If you want to spend those points, yeah. Like the nice thing about the points too is that sometimes you might start playing and not get doubles for a while, and you do need to meet the inhabitants and kind of get multiple encounters with them, because ultimately there's a finale scenario that you'll undertake in order to try to stay on the island. And so, like if I roll a 23, I can spend a wonder, make that a 33, and now I go and have an inhabitants encounter.
Have something
and
happen.
so you can start working your way through those too, because you need 5 of those ultimately before you can get to the finale.
Do you know?
Well, you can play it a couple different ways. If you play it just kind of straight up adventure game style, and just kind of make the rolls, go on the encounters, track everything, and then try to stay on the island, you plays in about, give or take, 2 hours. Okay. And since you're tracking your time on the island day by day, you can do it in little chunks too. You could do it like 4 half-hour lunch times, and play it out in like over the course of a week. There's also information in the book about options for if you want to journal while you're playing, or map the island also while you're playing. So if you wanted to add that kind of component, that 2-hour gameplay could become 3, 4, 5 hours, depending on how much you like to write and draw maps.
Are there any options if you would like to share this experience with friends and make it a not solo game?
It's not strictly designed as a kind of GM and group kind of game, but you could easily play it with like a GM. It could be like a duet game, like one GM and one player. And so the player just focuses on their character sheet, and playing their character and making choices and making rolls. And then the GM kind of handles, like, instead of the player reading what the encounter is, the GM kind of describes the encounter and calls for checks. And that the player could have the opportunity to, kind of role play to the GM, or to any of the like NPC types. Cause your character, you do meet inhabitants and other creatures and things that can talk to you. So you could then add role play. And if you love role play, if you love just getting into character, that's another thing that could really add on. You could, extend the game time by quite a bit if you just have a lot of role play encounter back and forth like that.
Have you played solo games prior to making this one?
I haven't played any that are like this, where it's like a bigger game where there's a lot more going on. I've done some journaling games. There's one that I really like called Artifact. Artefact. It was a zine game from a couple of years ago for Zine Quest. And you basically take on the part of an important item from this world that you're in, and the game is designed to write the history of this item. Like, how was it created? What, great adventures and deeds was it involved in? And you kind of track it all the way through kind of its life of how important it's been to different people and different events through history.
So I'm kind of wondering if these games are still RPG games, right? If you're playing by yourself, in the sense, like, I don't know, are people sitting there role playing with themselves?
Well, there's role play and then there's acting.
Yeah.
Like, if you're not necessarily acting, you're not speaking as your character, taking on mannerisms, miming things out, but you're putting yourself in the place of, like, okay, now I'm this person who's on this island. Like, let's say I'm a scholar, and I came looking for the island to learn about it. So I've got a high learn score, not necessarily a very good interact score, because I've spent a lot of time in libraries with books, not talking to people. And you just kind of take on that mentality of that scholar who's, and you explore according to what that scholar would do. Like, maybe the scholar will never spend worry because never wants to go to the dark parts of the island.
Yeah.
That sounds scary. I'm not equipped for that. So yeah, I mean, it's role play in the sense that you're taking on a role, but isn't necessarily acting. And the more active aspects of role play, if you're playing it by yourself.
Have you experimented or played with any of the GM-less systems?
Oh, I designed one. Yeah, I've played some GM-less stuff, mostly like stuff like Fiasco,
Okay.
kind of story game oriented stuff where it's very heavy on narrative and role play. And there's just a little bit of dice here and there to kind of give you a direction to go at certain key points in the story. I've played, Fiasco and Last Best Hope. That's a fun game that's been around for quite a while. That came out a little bit after Fiasco. It's very heavily modeled on Fiasco.
Because I know, like, I think Ironsworn and Starsworn, is it Starforged, have GM-less aspects. I've not actually yet played with any of those games yet, but
I've not.
Curious.
Yeah, I've not either. I'm gonna have to check it out at some point here.
Yeah, Ironsworn won a bunch of awards and stuff, I think.
Yeah,
and it did really well. Also, I found it kind of interesting because are you familiar with Matt Click?
I'm sorry,
Matt Click.
Not sounding familiar. No.
Yeah, he does a lot of freelance work, editor work, and done work for Wizards of the Coast and stuff. But I was really intrigued because it was like his dad made that game, so it's like 2 generations of game designers doing it. So I thought that was kind of a cool, neat aspect of it. So what are you playing nowadays?
Oh, geez. Mostly I'm GMing stuff that I'm designing.
Yeah.
Although I'm looking forward to, I got together with 4 other people on my Discord, and we're going to do like a round robin GMing one shot. And if things go well, it'll go for a while. We got one round plan. We're going to, like, every other Sunday for 5 sessions, one of us is going to GM a one shot for the others of like different games. So the first thing I'll be playing is Paranoia.
Nice.
Is it the Red Alert edition, the Red edition? Yeah, one of the people in there is going to GM Paranoia. I haven't played Paranoia since college, so I'm really looking forward to playing Paranoia again.
I have never played Paranoia. I'm somewhat
it's so ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the concept, but I've not played it. It definitely sounds like a blast. Our group actually played it, and I just happened to be out of town that weekend when they were playing. And I missed out. No friend computer for me.
Yeah, no kidding. Have a happy pill.
Yeah. How long has it been since you've played in a game?
Since I've played, what was the last game I played? It's probably been close to a year since I've played anything, unless I'm just forgetting. Like if I just play it like a one shot here or there, I sometimes lose track of it.
Yeah, that's easy to do.
Yeah, that's the issue. It's like a lot of times it's GMing stuff that I'm play testing of my own.
That's gotta be really tough to balance that. I mean, you got a full-time career, you're a game designer who's made a ton of games, and then now you're also running said games and playtesting said games. How do you squeeze it all in?
Well, it
You just
helps.
not sleep.
It helps that I'm not married and don't have kids, so I don't have certain responsibilities that a lot of people have. Um, the I think one of the things that kind of helps the most is that a lot of the playtesting as of late has started to be online, even before the whole pandemic thing.
Mm-hmm.
Online, I was doing a lot of playtesting online. It cuts down, like you remove that travel time to and from, or the time, uh, uh, if you're kind of communicating with people online and getting, just kind of having chit chats and things here and there, you don't spend the first half hour of getting together just chatting about stuff. That would happen so often when I did physical games, regularly, where the first half hour was just everybody catching up on everybody else's week. And I also do have, I've gotten into a tendency of, games that are like 2 hour and 3 hour game sessions. I don't tend to run 4, 5, 6 hour game sessions anymore. So it's a little easier to squeeze in playtesting.
I think that's an old guy
when you're
thing.
when you're not doing really long sessions.
Yeah. I think that's an old guy thing. I've stopped
absolutely.
having those long sessions anymore as well.
I don't got time for that anymore.
Like,
I got stuff to do.
2 or 3 hours, I'm good. Especially if I'm on the computer. Like if I'm playing on the computer, I really don't want to be in front of the computer for more than 2 hours at a time.
Yeah, I think I've gotten to where I've gotten good at, like, I can run a 3 hour session that's satisfying, that I can squeeze a good story into 3 hours with players and kind of, not find myself like, oh, well, I wish we had another hour or two to kind of finish this up, or having to stretch it over multiple sessions. Like I think that just comes with experience and with crafting certain types of stories as a GM. You just get better at, like, kind of fitting the time frame that you have available.
No, I totally agree. I feel like you can do a decent story in 2 hours with 4 players, but once you start adding to that 4 players, then it gets harder and harder, and you do need that like extra hour.
Yeah, and that's where I typically end up at is like 4 players too. That's I typically don't go higher than that, unless, like, Die Laughing, I can do 6 or 7 people and Die Laughing in 2 hours, but that's also it's a quicker resolved kind of game. The mechanics are simple. They only do 2 things.
Yeah.
So it's mostly just about, playing out the scenes.
So how many different systems have you created at this point? How many sets of mechanics, rule sets?
All right, let's see. Murders and Acquisitions has its own system. Capers and all its supplements have their system. Die Laughing is a unique system. Good Strong Hands and Nowhereville share the same system. And then there's like some zine games and really small, much smaller games that are unique systems, but they're very simple systems, because they're like, for Low Stakes, which is basically what we do in the Shadows, the RPG.
Yeah.
There's really only 2 things. Like, you're making checks when you're doing something that your character is very bad at, and you're making checks to try to gain clout amongst the roommates living in the house. Like, you're trying to gain influence over them. So that's the only time you're making rolls.
And you've used dice and cards so far that I know of.
Yes, dice and cards. I'm trying to think, have I used anything else?
Because Capers is all cards.
No, Capers is cards.
Yeah. So do you have any new mechanics you want to test out?
Well, I mean, like, I'm working on a game that will be using the roll track system that I used for Good Strong Hands and Nowhereville, but I'm evolving, like, in both versions, in both of those games, and now in this game, I'm like, there's a little bit of evolution to the system where I'm doing something a little different, because I'm kind of fitting a different genre. So I'm doing a few things a little differently. So that's a system unto itself. But it's it's related to, like, it will require less playtesting than a brand new system from the ground up. I think. I'm designing a game tentatively for Zine Quest next year, tentatively titled Felt, Friendship, and Feelings, which is basically the Muppets
Nice.
as a role-playing game. And it's a really simple system, but it involves sharing dice. Because the Muppets, found family, all good values, all sorts of good friendly stuff, and sharing is good, right? So like your character has a bunch of traits and you'll have dice assigned to them, and when you want to help somebody to do something with one of your traits that you have dice assigned to, you will actually give them the dice. If you play online, we'll have to have another system to keep track of that. But if you're at a table, you literally hand the die over to them, and they'll roll it, and then they'll put that die on their sheet somewhere. Oh, nice. So you'll actually be sharing the dice around the table, and you could potentially end up with some kind of asymmetric characters, where if somebody gives away a lot of their dice and somebody else has a lot more. But it's okay because you're all working together. so
how many genres have you explored so far?
All of them. I have explored all of them. No.
I feel like you combine them a lot of times as well.
I do like mashups.
Yeah.
So yeah, corporate mergers and acquisitions, and that's got like sub rules for a bunch of other stuff. There's capers is gangsters and supers, horror comedy, fantasy, horror comedy, another horror comedy, a science fiction game, specifically a time travel game.
It's like a subgenre of science fiction in and of itself.
Yeah, well, that's a very specific kind of beast too, because it's not time travel, and the mechanics aren't built around the thing that you would necessarily think they're built around with time travel. It's modeled after Quantum Leap, the TV show.
Oh, nice.
So it's a duet game. It's a GM and a player, although there's rules for information for playing multiple players as well. But basically, like if you were the GM, you would be like, my character would leap into the body of someone else and have to fix something that's gone wrong with their life, and help them out. And you would, you don't actually define what that is. You just define the challenge in the moment. See, like the GM doesn't know what the discovery is going to be, because that was the great thing about that show. If you watched Quantum Leap, was always, you never knew what Sam was there to fix until it finally happened. There were always red herrings. He thought he was there to fix this or that, or Al thought he was there to fix something else. And so there's a system in the game where you build up points, and once you hit a threshold, that's the point where you say, okay, and that's the thing that you were actually there to fix. So the player and the GM discover that together as you play the game.
As someone who's created a lot of different games, a lot of different mechanics and rule sets, what's like the number one piece of advice you could give someone that wants to become a game designer?
Well, I mean, from the viewpoint of someone who pretty much always makes their own game mechanics, first rule is there's nothing wrong with using a system that exists. Like there's games out there that people love the system. You'll have audience kind of built in. If you're familiar with the system, try that. But if you want to make your own system, best advice out of the gate is start simple. Don't try to reinvent the role-playing game, dice system, something very straightforward. And keep it to the scale of the game too. Like if it's a simple, if you want to create design a relatively straightforward, simple kind of smaller game, keep the mechanical system under control and keep it smaller, and make sure that it just kind of does what it needs to do, and don't push it further than it needs to go.
When you first got started, did you start off by freelancing for other people and kind of working with their systems, or did you out the gate hit the floor running with, I'm just going to make my own stuff?
Well, my earliest freelancing was during 3rd edition D&D, kind of toward the end, and then into a good chunk of 4th edition D&D, where I wrote, I designed convention modules for Gen Con and some other conventions, and then stuff for the Wizards website, and then, for Dragon and Dungeon magazines. So it was like I got a foundation in working within another system. And, I think that helped me to kind of come to understand how a game system does what it does, and what allows a game system to do. Like it does this thing really well, but it does this thing kind of okay, and then doesn't really do this thing very well. And every game system has its strengths and weaknesses. And just examining other games systems and just seeing what other things do and talking to players and find out what they like. Like if you want to design a game that involves rolling a lot of dice, you know what? There's going to be an audience for that, because there's a certain subset of gamers that'll be like, I get to roll like 20 d6. Sign me up. They love rolling dice, and a lot of them.
Yeah, I feel like it. I feel like from my own experience and what I've running into different people that have designed games, I feel like better designers kind of start somewhere first, build a foundation, like you said, and then can if you understand the ins and outs of designing from that foundation, I think it makes you better at designing your own stuff, and you get less of people designing things because when I ask them, I'm like, well, why did you do it that way? And they're like, oh, I just want it to be different. Like I find like when I talk to designers like you and some other established designers, like they usually have something specific they're trying to do, and there's an actual reason for it, not just because.
Sure. And I think with most designers, most game designers, there will be a reason. It's just a question of whether that reason is, like, for me, usually the reason is the mechanic is designed this way because I wanted to do this because that's what the game is about, and I want this thing to kind of fit that way into what the game is about. It's a thematic thing, and there's nothing magical about it. There's like certain parts of like Murders and Acquisitions. The dice system is nothing spectacular. What's cool about it is that your character sheet is a resume. And there's a dice mechanic that takes advantage of like how you list things on a resume. So, for some people that reason is, well, I'm designing in this system because it's the system I know. I've been playing it for years and years and years. I know it really well. Or, there's a lot of ways to approach that, and you can get that experience through freelancing for other people, and you can get that experience for just playing a lot of different games. Yeah. And reading a lot of different games. There are plenty of people out there that they never really freelanced for anyone. They went in, they designed a game because they've played 100 different games, and they took ideas, some of ideas of their own, little bits and pieces from other games, and smashed it all up and came up with something interesting.
So you've done a bit of podcasting too. Do you still have an ongoing podcast?
I'm not doing the Nerdburger podcast anymore. That's still going with Mike and other folks. But I stepped away from that a little while ago. Recently was like almost a year ago, but we've had missed episodes and weeks and stuff like that. We're back on a better schedule now. Me and Jess Geyer from Wannabe Games are doing a podcast called RPG R&D, where we bring a guest on every week who is also a designer in some realm of the RPGs. Might be doing kind of really, really indie stuff, might be somebody who freelances a lot for bigger companies, all that sort of thing. And we hit two topics, and one is a GMing topic, and then one is a game design topic. And so we've been doing a pretty good job recently of managing to pair those up, like a GM topic and a design topic that are kind of mildly related.
You're doing something with Eloy for a little while too, right?
Yeah, that RPG R&D came out of that. That was one of the things that we were doing as part of that. We had Eloy LaSanta from Third Eye Games. We put together a Twitch stream thing that we wanted to do called Nerd Eye, which is a combination of Nerdburger and Third Eye. And it turned out to be a lot of work to keep a Twitch stream and have multiple things going, and just so many things kind of were working against us on that we shuttered it all up. But RPG R&D with Jess, we rolled over from being a stream into a straight audio podcast, and we've been on track for weekly episodes for a couple months now, 3 months.
Nice. Yeah, I know I've definitely popped in on a few of those. You guys are great people and have lots of good advice. So Brian,
it's been a fun one. I've really been enjoying this podcast. I've kind of gotten into the swing of it. I think Jess and I have found our footing And it,
Nice.
like, every time we do it, it feels like, okay, here we are. This is like, we know what we're doing now.
So Brian wants to know, help, I'm planning a Halloween one-shot for a troupe of kid characters to investigate a spooky mansion. I want to use as simple a rule set as possible. Any suggestions for easy horror-ish mechanics? But you probably have at least one game that does that.
Kids, I don't know for sure how old the kids are, but
It says kid characters.
Kid characters.
I don't know if they're actually kids playing or not.
Okay, that's true. Okay, so you might consider Dread if as a one shot, with if they're going to be people that are, if the players are people that are going to really get into the tension of it, because it's that you're taking that Jenga tower, tumbling block tower, and you're slowly pulling pieces out and stacking them on top, and it's just a matter of time until something terrible happens when the tower falls. It's a great system for a one shot. Like, it creates a great experience at the table.
Yeah, look at you being all humble. You've got like 2 games, Die Laughing and Nowhereville, that are absolutely horror-based RPGs that you've written.
Well, and okay, so let's say this: if you want to do Die Laughing for kid characters, whether that's, I don't know if that's single digit kids or like teenagers or whatever, you could easily enough do or whether the players are kids, but you could do a not gory, not explicit, like a little more kid friendly, kind of kid oriented story easily enough, where there's monsters in there. That's a comedy horror game. The characters are going to die. So it's all about just trying to make it funny. And if that's what people are into for that, if the players are into that, there's monsters in there that are good for just kind of silly hijinks, like the Blob character, the Blob monster, where the thing's stats change as it absorbs other characters. I'm trying to think what else is there. There's some that are really silly, like the robots from, what is it? Murderous Robots from Mars or whatever they're called, which is just, every mechanical device in the world turns out to be a transformer. And so your washing machine comes alive, and your weed whacker grows legs and comes after you. So you could make that all sorts of kind of light and funny and silly, if it's kind of kid character oriented.
Yeah. And then your Nowhereville is another game where it is basically horror themed as well, right?
Yeah, that's a very Stephen King small town horror kind of thing. So your characters are stuck in this town where terrible things happen, and everybody forgets that these things happen. Like, they don't remember that the terrible things happen. And so they continue to happen, and your characters start remembering and not forgetting when things happen. So they can now fight back.
And I'll throw out there, Monster of the Week is also always a great game for spooky, supernatural antics, and very easy to learn, especially if you're familiar with Powered by Apocalypse already.
You can just give the system's simple. Give everybody a playbook and make your choices for that. And
plenty of options.
Yep.
So who is the last guest you had on your podcast? Well, not podcast, but show. Right? You guys do it on YouTube.
It's just it goes up on the nerdburgergames.com website, and then also in the podcatchers and everything. It's just an audio podcast. Who was the last one? The last one that was I have to double check because we recorded in advance. What's the last one?
I have no idea.
What's the last one I just put up?
That was that was not meant to be a trick question.
Yeah, I know, but the last person that I talked to is not their episode's not up yet. So let me just double check. Who was the last person we put up?
So while you're looking at that, what do you think the next con will be that you get out to?
Me? It's probably it's hard to say, but it's probably going to be next year. I was considering going out to PAX Unplugged.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably going to be maybe Con Nuga, which will happen in like February or March in Chattanooga. I haven't been there in a few years, and that's relatively close by for me. Or it may be MomoCon in Atlanta, which is an anime convention, but it's like one of those conventions that has like a little bit of everything, but anime is kind of the central theme. So it has a big dealer hall. It's local, and it's got enough of everything else that I think there would probably be a good turnout in the dealer hall, and I could run some actual games. Last person we got up there to talk to was Jeffrey Golden, who he and his partner did the officially licensed RPG of Wet Hot American Summer.
Okay, I don't even know what that is. To know
the Netflix series.
It's a Netflix series.
Well, it was a movie, and then they did a Netflix series based on it. That's like either a prequel or a sequel. And we discuss remembering that the GM is a player and not just the GM, and also setting boundaries as a designer, because you're in the public eye and you've got a parasocial relationship with people on social media, and like just remembering that like you can say no to things. You don't have to be at the beck and call of every fan that seeks you out.
Anybody that's in the public eye at all, that can be rough. I mean, at least for us in like RPGs is a small niche, so like even if you get like really popular, it's like you can step outside of this niche and just have a normal life as well.
Yeah, but it's different too now. Like, if you were a well-known a name designer that people would recognize your name 20 years ago, like you wouldn't probably get accosted until you were at conventions. But like now it's like, if you've got a social media presence, you might have people dropping questions into your, Facebook or your Twitter DMs or whatever. No, that's not allowed. Don't do that. Anybody. No, don't just show up.
That was not advice or a suggestion, but just as a thing that I know that has happened to people. I don't think it happens necessarily in our niche, but definitely like other YouTubers and stuff for sure.
Yeah, but anybody who has like a fan base, even if it's small, it's good to know. It's good to keep in mind that you can set boundaries and just make those very clear and make sure people understand that like I'm not going to be at anybody. I'm not going to be at your beck and call. I don't owe a response to every single thing that comes in. Like, obviously if like a Kickstarter goes out to be fulfilled and somebody didn't get their reward, I'll deal with that. But like if somebody, comes after me with a bunch of questions about something, like I am under no obligation to answer them. If I do, I do. That's great. I do quite a lot. But, you do have to decide that,
Well, one of those things is a customer service thing. And the other is, the other is just like, people intruding in your life.
It can be people. It gets to the point of being taken advantage of.
It can be rough. Like I definitely know because we are so many different places. It's like we've definitely gotten angry responses like, "You didn't respond to my comment," like so and so normally does. I'm like, sorry, I had a cold that day. I don't like give me anything, right? Like even when you want to, it's just like. You might look at something and be like, "Oh, I'll get back to this later," because maybe you were at a red light in your car and were looking at your phone when you shouldn't have been, and then you like never get back to it.
Yeah, there's a million reasons you didn't respond.
Yeah, what are you gonna do? How long is the Kickstarter gonna run for? It's coming up on the 5th.
Yeah, it'll run for 4 weeks, so it'll run through the Thursday 4 weeks later,
Nice.
Whatever that is, November 4th or 5th or something like that.
Ooh, so how did you conduct the play testing for that one?
For Secrets of the Vibrant Isle?
Yeah.
Well, I put a call out for play testing and explained very clearly what it was, because I wanted people, because it's kind of out of the ordinary. I wanted people to be clear on what they were getting into, and then also described kind of in a bit, described a bit like I'm going to be asking for some really specific information, because I need to gauge, like you've got 4 weeks of game time to quote win the game. Like, can you do it? Like I need a sample, right? I need a bunch of people to play it.
Yeah.
Ideally multiple times. And I want them to track, like, how many days does it take them to to get to the finale. Do they succeed? How many days does it take to do this? How many times did they do this thing, that thing, the other thing? You know, how many times did they explore the island? How many times did they protect their camp? How many times did they improve their character? And just get a sample of get an idea, right, of how much everybody did all these different things. And there's a lot of variation because everybody plays it a little differently, and just kind of make sure that like, okay, well, like, is 4 weeks way too much time? Is it not nearly enough time? So there was a lot of like counting of things, like people had to keep track of how many times they did this or that.
How was the response when you put out the initial request for playtesters for that game? Because it is a bit different than maybe what people are used to.
Well, I put the response out in my Discord and on Twitter, and I got like 15 or 16 people, something like that, to respond. And I used a dozen.
Okay.
And each of those dozen, most of them played it more than once. Plus I played it and the other designer played it.
Yeah, I was wondering like if you got a lot of people like, oh wow, this is really cool. We need something like this, or I don't have a group to play with. I wish I could play by myself, and now you're making the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, for playtesting, that was a good turnout.
Yeah. Okay.
For how much I usually get, like for right now, for Code Warriors, for the next game that I'm working on, that I've got 7 people who have expressed interest to have them and their group playtest the game.
Code Warriors, is that about programming?
It's about computers. It's the idea is you are computer people like in Tron, and the computer is crashing for the last time, so it's the apocalypse like Mad Max.
Oh, nice. That is definitely a interesting concept. So you're living a digital life, and there's a digital apocalypse, but it's going to be very real for you.
Yes.
Where did you come up with that idea from?
I don't even remember for that one. Where did I get that one? Gosh, I don't remember.
You definitely are good at coming up with these like
that one. I'm just not sure.
Yeah.
But like, you know, it's a fun idea to extrapolate onto, and things I've discovered like as I've been writing too is like, okay, well, if they're programs, like, and there's like a bunch of different program types. And before the apocalypse happened, before what's called the collapse in the game, capital C, you had a job, like you were part of a program, you did a thing. And so it's almost like you were kind of in a class-based system. Like the world of the computer was sort of a classist society. And then the apocalypse comes and nobody has a job anymore. Nobody has a thing they have to do. Nobody has to be this thing anymore. So what does that do? Like, how does that color you as a character?
Yeah. When
you suddenly have complete freedom until somebody tries to slam you back down in place. Is
this kind of like a more standard game where you have a GM and you have players, or okay?
Yep. It'd be a GM and players. There's some interesting things that I'm looking forward to doing beyond the system itself and beyond the theme, where like I'm mapping the system. It uses D8s, right? So 8's the number I work. There's a lot of 8's in the game because 8 bits in a byte. And so there's an 8x8 grid. That's the system. That's the map, is an 8x8 grid. And every square is a quadrant. And as the apocalypse progresses, there's in the game what's referred to as collapse phases, which is just different different milestones for as the apocalypse goes. So like every few game sessions, there might be, you might change collapse phase, go to the next one. And whenever that happens, you roll on a table and decide, and you roll for a quadrant, roll a D8 and another D8, you pick a quadrant on the map and you decide what happens to that place. And it can be anywhere between that quadrant is just gone.
Yeah.
It's disappeared. Everything that was there is gone, and it is gone forever. It can be like, it become that area of the grid of the system becomes cut off from the power source. So if you want to go in there, you need a battery, which means that all the programs that were there are now in suspended animation until you can get batteries to them to power themselves. Or it can be like that area becomes swarmed over with aberrants, which is like the byproduct of the collapse. It's all the it's monsters basically. They're called aberrants, and it's corrupted data. It's all kinds of and I'm having fun coming up with those as well. Like, why is like this is data left over after a hacker's attempt was scrubbed out, but there was some data left over and it all coalesced into this monster that's out to just destroy the system now, because that's what the hacker was trying to do.
Is Big Strong Hands your like only like regular game? Like
a regular game?
Because everything is like always a mishmash of things, and I think it's great. Like I don't take that in a negative way. I don't mean that at all. But like it's the only game I think I see that you put out that's like, oh, this is just straight up. This is your version of a fantasy game.
Yeah, Good Strong Hands is basically like Labyrinth and never ending story and Legend and things like those types of movies, kind of as a fantasy game. Nowhereville is pretty straightforward. That's like Stephen King horror. Yeah, that's like kind of classic horror, classic contemporary horror kind of stuff. Small town. That's not really a mashup of things. But yeah, there are a lot of mashups.
Yeah, you're like what if there was superheroes but also crime and the Roaring Twenties, or like.
And what if they were in space now?
Yeah. What if there's horror and comedy? Oh, and you're on a movie set. Yeah, so. I love it. I think it's really unique and great. Brian has probably asked the most important question of all again. How does Clippy factor into this world?
Clippy?
He's got to be one of the aberrants.
Oh, I think maybe Clippy needs to, like a help program, basically. That's a really great idea, Brian. I'm going to have to do something with a help program.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure, like, if you just look through, like, memes and stuff, you'll find some great stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
well, I've got some interesting, weird places in the system map. Like, there's going to be some just, like, kind of strange locations, and maybe like some help program, creature, person, thing, whatever, might need to live in one of those. And are they still good at their job even though everything's collapsing? Like, how useful is their help?
Will we get light cycles? That's the really important question.
There are light cycles in the game.
Friends of mine actually made that as
there are glowy frisbee weapons too. You can throw a disc at people.
Nice. And hopefully they'll knock you off your disc.
It used to be
one of my favorite arcade games. Do you remember that game? The Tron game?
Oh yeah. Tron that was great. The light cycle game was tough. I was not very good at that.
Yeah, I crashed
all the time.
I think that was the regular play of the game. I got pretty decent at the one where you're on the discs and you had to basically it's like suicide frisbee where you're just trying to knock the other person off.
Yeah. And you'll be able to get a bit from Tron too, a little floating point of light that can answer yes/no questions.
Yeah.
So you can have a bit that'll follow you around and help you.
Will you be incorporating blockchain into your game? Oh no! Like you should, but when you buy the game, you should turn the game into an NFT.
No, that's okay. I'll just give you a PDF. And a bunch of people will end up sharing that with their friends. That's okay too. I'm not the end of the world. Don't
Unless
need some.
It is if you get to the end of the game, it's then.
Well, the game is the end of the world. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. My hope is I'm going to work it out in such a way that there's 3 player modes for the game. There's easy, hard, and hopeless. Easy is where the apocalypse is happening and you can stop it. Hard is where the apocalypse is. No, sorry, wrong way. Easy is the apocalypse happens and then it gets to a certain point and just kind of stops at like the Mad Max level, like everything's effed up.
Yeah.
And you can just keep playing the game like that. Hard is the apocalypse is happening and you can stop it. And then hopeless is the apocalypse is happening and you can't stop it. And it's just a question of what you do with the rest of your time.
Oh, nice. Vast Grim is like that a little bit. You have something called Torments. And it uses, pretty much all the polyhedrals. And, at the beginning of every game day in the in a session or just in the game, You roll that whatever the die you start. If you start with a D20, you would start with that. If you want it harder, you start with a smaller die. But when you roll one, you step down a die until you're out of dice, and then the universe just ends, and the game is over. So like, the idea is you're trying to find a way out of the universe before it ends. So that could be kind of a fun mechanic as well. But I like that. I like you have the different modes of play in your game, and eventually one of them is like you're trying to stop the apocalypse, or you can play in the apocalypse. So what does an apocalypse look like in the digital world?
That's a good question. Like it's it's like it's in development because the game's kind of still being worked on here. I've got some concept work done, some concepting art from my artist, and he's on board to finish up everything too, eventually. But it's going to be a lot of like when you see things go wrong on your screen, like when you get like artifacting and little fuzzy stuff and
blue screen of
where
death.
something freezes. There is a disease called the blue screen. That's one of the things I've been having the most fun with in the game is coming up with computery kind of names for things. When you there's a monster, when it goes invisible, its ability is called derez. Just stuff like that.
Nice.
There's a monster, an aberrant, when it can take control of you, and the ability is called install. Was it install aberrant or install? Can't remember what I called it. Install something, like it installs something in you that takes control of you. So it's very computer oriented.
Nice. Do you know what the mechanics are going to be in that game? Also, it's in development, so if you don't want to talk about it, that's okay too.
It'll be similar to Good Strong Hands and Nowhereville. It's just those two use D6s. This one will use D8s, so it expands the die type that you're using. But basically, you'll be rolling multiple dice and trying to get at least one of them to hit a target number.
Okay, so it's dice pools.
It's a dice pool game.
And is it classless, or all your games are classless, right?
I would say, well, I've got Good Strong Hands and Nowhereville and Low Stakes are all like playbook games. So I guess those are technically what you would call class games. Like you decide, well, I'm going to play a pixie, and the pixie has this array of stuff that you can get access to. They don't call them classes, but that's,
similar. Yeah.
It's a similar thing. It's like, it's niche protection. That's really what class and playbooks are. Is it's like, here's a character archetype, and it's got its niche, and it's good at doing these things, and nobody else is as good as this thing is.
So Mike wants to know, can you control Alt Delete at any point?
Do you want to reboot the game? Yeah, you can reboot the game anytime you want, I suppose.
So what is the best way for people to kind of stay in touch with what you're doing? Like, do you put out design journals or anything?
I'm at Nerdburger Craig on Twitter. And so I chit chat on there about stuff and announce and kind of keep people up to speed. I also have a Discord for Nerdburger Games. I think I sent you a link for it.
Yes.
That you can share. And if you don't have that link handy, you can go to my pinned tweet on Twitter, or to nerdburgergames.com. There's a link there to the Discord. And there's I do a lot of posting in the Discord where, I'm talking about game design that's underway. I'm finding play testers. I'm brainstorming ideas. Like I need to come up with, 20 more of this thing. Yeah. And people just like, got any cool ideas? And people just toss ideas out. And
so I'm definitely curious to see what you come up with next. Cause like I said, they're always like interesting things that I would have never thought of. So that, that's a lot of fun. So on that note, final thoughts before we head on out?
Go take a look at Secrets of the Vibrant Isle. If you're listening to this before the Kickstarter goes live, I believe I sent you a link to the follow page so you can be notified. Otherwise, just look for it after October 5th.
You absolutely
And
did send me some links, and they are down in the description for people. Go check it out. Go follow Craig across the interwebs. And until next time, stay nerdy.
stay nerdy.